Tracey Lyall, Executive Director of Domestic Violence Intervention Services of Tulsa. Thank you so much for joining In Depth with Dion.
I am happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's been a long time coming. I think it was 2018 when we first met.
And I think so.
When I first interviewed you for a story about domestic violence. And I just remember you being so welcoming, allowing me into the space, giving me a tour of the space. It was really, I really appreciated it because I had no understanding of the issue really before meeting with you.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to do that. I think, one of the things I knew when you set up that interview was that you were interested in this topic and already had passion about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess sometimes passion is all you got to start with.
That's right.
The rest comes after. But speaking of passion, how long have you been executive director at DVIS, and what got you into this work?
I have been the CEO at DVIS for 18 years. And that really, it kind of happened, it really just sort of happened out of the blue for me. Not in terms of, that role certainly happened kind of out of the blue for me. I'm a native Tulsan. So I went to the University of Tulsa and was working on my undergraduate degree in psychology. And I had a college friend who was working part-time at the DVIS shelter.
Okay.
Back then, so this was like the early 1990s. And she's like, we're looking for people to work at the shelter, like in the evenings. And, it's a, good part-time job while you're in college. And so I said, sure, yeah. And so I joined DVIS's part-time staff back in the early 90s, like 1991, and started as an advocate at our shelter at night. So we were really just basically part-time staff, kind of keeping the shelter running overnight, in the evening and overnight. And then, the full-time staff would come in during the day. And so when I started that work, working with women in the shelter, it really just kind of hooked me. I had never grown up in a home with domestic violence. I didn't have some friends that had violence in their home and neighbors growing up. And so I had a little bit of exposure there, but I really had not seen the condition that families would come in the doors at DVIS before. And I had not really been that close to it. And at that point, I just knew that this was the kind of work I wanted to do. So I stayed working there through my undergraduate degree. And I had a mentor at the shelter who said, really, you need a master's degree. I don't really care what you get it in, but just get one if you want to do this work. And so I really credit Taryn, that was my mentor there, took a year off and then started my master's degree and got my master's in social work. I did a lot of work in the social services field. I left there for a while, did some other things. And then in 2007, I circled back to DVIS when the position was posted. Wow. And I never really, I was, I was working with the homeless. I had worked for Tulsa Housing Authority. So I'd worked in families in poverty and so forth. But I really never saw myself as, coming back to be the CEO at DVIS. I really thought at some point I would, do some private practice counseling or something like that. And my career just didn't take me that way. I landed the job at DVIS in 2007 and just so grateful to be working there. And I love the team. I love the work. It's meaningful and impactful and hard. But it really is a kind of a part of who I am. So.
It sounds like you didn't choose the work kind of chose you.
Yeah, it did.
Talk about start from the bottom. Now we're here. Like you literally started from the bottom.
Yeah.
So you've seen it all. You've seen every aspect of what it takes to make DVIS run. And for those who may be unaware, unfamiliar with what DVIS does, can you talk a little bit about like the different services you offer and resources you offer for people in the community?
So, I mentioned emergency shelter. That's, I think, probably most what people think about when they think of DVIS is just the safety and protection that we can offer through emergency shelter. And we have a 91-bed shelter for individuals and families who need to come in and be safe because of domestic or sexual violence or human trafficking. And we also have counselors on staff, licensed eligible therapists on staff doing counseling with adult survivors of domestic sexual violence and trafficking. That all of that counseling is free. So it's really a program that's designed to help people overcome the trauma that they've experienced because of the violence they've experienced. And then the same for children who've witnessed domestic violence, who have survived witnessing and growing up with domestic violence. We have free counseling for them with therapists at our outpatient counseling office. We have transitional housing. We own about 20 units of apartments, 1, 2, and 3 bedroom that families can live in for up to 2 years.
Wow.
So it's a time that they can just sort of gain some stability and healing, and maybe find a job and find, schools that they want their kids to go to, and childcare and all of those things. And that's been one of our most successful programs. I like to think of that as it's really the program that gives people the amount of time they need to recover, because they're with us. They can be with us for up to 2 years. So let's see. We also have counseling for those who've caused harm. So our abusive partners intervention program. So people who've been court ordered to come to DVIS because of a domestic violence or assault and battery charge, and were court ordered to come for classes at DVIS. So we have that program. We've done a few unique things with that program. We actually have a partnership with Restorative Justice Institute of Oklahoma, doing some restorative justice work with people who've caused harm. And so we're kind of still in our pilot phase there, but really giving people the opportunity to repair the harm that they've done to others and to the community, and to talk about the harm that they've been through, and sort of repair that and move forward, and sort of move away from sort of this punishment system that I think a lot of us feel like really doesn't rehabilitate anyone, So, that program for us is called Circles of Peace. And it's been about a year in operation, so we're still trying things out and trying to get people through the program, and that's just a little bit different population for us. So these are folks who are not criminally charged yet, but have had some involvement with the child welfare system, or could perhaps be from a tribe and had some domestic violence occur. And those folks can choose to do the Circles of Peace program. Yeah. So we have, I can kind of go on. We have an office in Creek County in Sepulpa. So outreach, we've really kind of increased our footprint in Creek County, which is a large county in Oklahoma. It's mostly rural. And we received a federal grant that helped us sort of increase our footprint there, as well as some local support, so that we can just sort of be out into like Bristow and Depew and, all those small towns out in Drumright, out in Creek County, to serve people who've experienced violence and they, don't have a shelter nearby. So the closest shelter for them would be a Tulsa shelter, DVIS. And so just doing some more outreach, help with protective orders in Creek County. We do a lot of education and training. So groups ask us to come out and talk to their civic groups or their church groups, and just talk about domestic violence and the services that we offer. So, and then we also have a 24-hour response for sexual assault in Tulsa. We've had that for many, many years when DVIS merged with Call Rape back in 2005. And so we have advocates who respond 24 hours a day to sexual assault forensic exams, along with nurses, and sometimes law enforcement is involved in those. And so we do lots of different things. I think we have about 100 employees at DVIS. People don't really understand that we're that big, but we are. Yeah, it is. We're grateful to all of this community support that's kind of allowed us to continue to expand and grow.
Well, so it's kind of a good thing and a bad thing, I guess, that you've needed to grow, right? If we take kind of a bird's eye view of the issue, in recent years, Oklahoma has been listed as between number one and number two for the highest rates of domestic violence in the nation. Um, and it's been that way for some years, especially as it relates to violence against women. Um, I guess, first of all, why do you think that is? We call ourselves the buckle of the Bible Belt, right? So, what do you think it is that, what is it about our culture or our norms, or our beliefs that make us feel that this issue, it should be something that's privately handled and not discussed as a public health crisis?
I think I get asked that question quite a bit. It's like, why is it so high in Oklahoma? So I think, the fact that we're in the Bible Belt, um, probably has some influence on that in terms of, how marriage is viewed and how family commitment is important, in Tulsa. And domestic violence has been seen a lot as a private family matter, and not something that, other people should know about or intervene in and that sort of thing. So there's that cultural piece that kind of influences people to perhaps mind their own business and not get involved. And that's, sort of counterproductive because we have to get involved to move that needle. And so, I think you have to understand that domestic and sexual violence and trafficking don't happen in a vacuum. We are looking at the intersection of lots of social issues, social conditions in Tulsa, um, from areas of extreme poverty, food insecurity. We're 50th in the nation for education.
Yeah.
We have a good amount of gang violence, methamphetamine use, other drug use, um, and we have lots of guns in Oklahoma, and we know that guns are used in these homicides, and so it's open carry in our state, and that is often how people are killed by their abusive partner. And so when you put all of those social conditions together, you sort of created this perfect storm, if you will, of where desperation and violence occur. Um, a lot of out of control emotions, a lot of hurt people who are hurting other people. And so, you have to take a look at all of those conditions in order to impact the the occurrence of domestic and sexual violence in Tulsa. And one of the ways that we've done that in the last year and a half has been through the Mayor's Commission on Domestic Violence. In January of 2024, Mayor Bynum started the Mayor's Commission on Domestic Violence. And then when Mayor Nichols took office in January of this year, he came right behind it and in full force has supported the continuation of the commission, which brings together all of the people that make up of the system, the criminal justice system, law enforcement, district attorneys, advocates, other nonprofits who help people who are incarcerated, um, the church community, tribal community, just bringing together all of the necessary players to take a look at what is happening in Tulsa and in the state around domestic and sexual violence. And so that commission has done some good work over the 18 months. We have a third-party facilitator coming in. They were from an organization called BWJP, which used to stand for Battered Women's Justice Project. I think they're just now known as BWJP. And they just come into communities and help sort of look at safety and gaps in services. And I mean, that group, the commission, and all of the frontline folks under all of those agencies that are represented have looked at gaps in the service system. They've reviewed police reports and done ride-alongs and sat in courtrooms and listened to hearings and observed at 911 and just really sort of done an informational dive into how are things being handled in Tulsa. And that's really just, one, it strengthened relationships and trust among those partners, which is really key in working together to try to fix this issue. in our town. And so there's been some really cool things that have happened from that work. And I can talk about that more a little bit later. But so there, it's just those kinds of collaborative efforts. I mean, we're in a city, we love to meet in Tulsa, and we talk about meetings, but and this was another meeting, but it really has been critical in sort of looking at systemic changes that we can make as a community to move the needle so that we're not first or second in the country for women who are murdered by a male intimate partner.
When we think about progress at the legislative level, you and others at DVIS and other organizations have been advocating for elevating certain crimes to be taken more seriously. I know that strangulation was a topic of discussion on a bill recently.
Mhm.
Well, in the past several sessions.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about what happened with that and why strangulation was even focused on in this issue?
Yes. So I believe the legislation you're referring to was this most recent legislative session where strangulation was made an 85% crime. And one of the things we know about domestic violence and homicides is that strangulation is the most lethal thing a person can do to another person. And it is very dangerous, not only when it happens, but days, weeks, and months later after a strangulation occurs because of the damage that it's done internally. And it just takes a very little amount of pressure to strangle someone. And breath is our lifeline.
Yeah.
And if someone has put their hands around your neck, it's a very high indicator that that person could very likely kill you. And it's also a high indicator of the kind of people who kill law enforcement officers. So it's very dangerous for law enforcement. It's been connected to that as well as to mass shooters.
What?
So when you look at some of the histories of people who've caused harm,
Mhm.
strangulation is in their background. And so it's just a very, very critical sign that of someone's dangerousness. And so it's one of the things that law enforcement and at DIVIS, we listen for when someone's describing the harm that's happened to them. So, so that was an important law to change. I mean, it's a serious crime. It can take someone's life. It has taken many people's lives, and it just needed to be an 85% crime in our state. So there was a lot of work to be done. A lot of work to be done to make that happen.
You know, you've spoken about some of the obstacles culturally that we run into when it comes to trying to get awareness around this issue, trying to get action and advocacy around this issue. Um, I want to talk about survivor defendant cases where, typically women have been convicted for killing their abusers in self-defense. In recent years, there's a new law that's been passed here to make it easier for survivors of domestic abuse who've been convicted to trying to get resentencing or to try and get early release, years taken off of their sentences. Um, when we talk about some of the particular cases, I want to briefly talk about Tyesha Long,
Mhm.
a Black woman who is facing decades in prison after she shot her abuser. She claims in self defense. Oklahoma Appleseed is supporting her case and working right now to get her released. Can you talk a little bit about how often do you see these types of situations, and why is it that the survivors of domestic abuse never seem to be able to prove that this was self-defense in a state where we pride ourselves on self-defense in Oklahoma? So why does it seem like certain people don't aren't aren't able to receive that protection?
No, I think there's a lot as you like sort of unpeel the layers about all that. But Tyesha is among hundreds of women that OK Appleseed has visited with or heard from who have been in prison because a crime has been committed that's related to the domestic violence that they're experiencing. And so, you know, in Oklahoma, you mentioned we're the buckle of the Bible Belt. And, I think there's some history with particularly conservative religious communities where the man is the head of the household and the woman is to be submissive. Um, and the man in the household is to be the person who says how things are supposed to be. And oftentimes, I think that has been taken to its extreme and used against women to keep them under power and control. And we see that a lot in domestic violence relationships. And we talk about the cycle of power and control. And most often, when we see it, it is male over female. Now, there are cases where there's female over male. Those just don't seem to surface as often. I think it's more common, but there's a stigma with that, just like there's a stigma for women to come forward um, about violence that's occurred towards them. So, we have this sort of understanding, and I think that contributes to that. It's a family issue, it's a marital issue, it's a private issue. Let's not get involved in that. And then I think we just have this history of incarcerating women in Oklahoma. I mean, we used to be number one in incarceration of women. I think we're still like second or third.
Yes.
And so, for whatever reason, we are more severe on women in crime who commit crimes than most other states. And it's like we want to punish women when fathers are abusive and their kids get taken away, or fathers are abusive towards the kid. We're going to punish her for not protecting the kids more than we're going to punish the person who's caused the harm. And we see numerous cases like that in our state. And cases like Tyesha, who was defending herself after abuse from this person who was, I think, quite a bit older than her when the crime occurred, and clearly had power and control in the relationship over her. And she takes action to defend herself in fear of her life, which many of these women who are incarcerated will say, I thought he was going to kill me. And they take matters into their own hands because they have no other option in those moments. They feel like they do. That's one reason this podcast is so important, and just to let people know that DVIS is available too, is that there are options. And we never want to promote violence at all of any form. But when you're desperate and you feel like your life is at risk, unfortunately, these kinds of things occur. And, I think what you really have to ask yourself is, was this person a threat? Is this person a threat to the general community?
Right.
And in many, many, many of these cases, no, they are not a threat to anyone in the community. They were a threat to the person who's been causing them harm. That's it. And so, many of these women have been incarcerated for most of their lives, and deserve to now be out and free. And that was such a critical law that OK Appleseed helped get into place. It took 2 years for them to put the Criminalized Survivors Justice Act into place. And so we're just now being able to see some good things happen from that act.
And, when we talk about options, one thing that I really appreciated learning from you in our first interview years ago was when you explained the importance of having an exit plan. I think so many people, especially people who just don't ever look into the issue of domestic violence, have these ignorant questions, right? Why didn't she leave, right?
Mhm.
Why didn't she tell somebody? Why didn't she just call the police? Why didn't she get a protective order? And in a lot of cases, even when you do that, it's ended in death sometimes.
Mhm.
Can you talk about what is an exit plan? When should someone who is going through domestic abuse, when is the right time for them to move forward with an exit plan? And how does DVIS help?
Yeah, we refer to that as safety planning,
Safety.
sort of planning a safe way to exit the relationship, and it's very much centered on the survivor. And they know their situation best. They've lived it. They know when the safest time for them to exit is going to be. We are just there to help them think about things that they're going to need when they exit, things to prepare for, ways to keep themselves safe as they're exiting. That can be anything from how to sort of signal someone else to intervene when they're unsafe, a code word. It could be a porch light on and some signal with a neighbor that, hey, something's going on while you call the police. Or it can be collecting important medications, documents that you're going to need when you leave. So it's really just a number of things. It's about if you are separated, staying safe when you're taking your kids to and from appointments or schools and not going the same way every time. I mean, particularly if you feel like your partner's going to be following you. So it's really just thinking through all the different ways that you need to consider safety for you and your family. We know that the most dangerous time for a survivor of domestic violence is when they have exited the relationship. And the reason for that is because they've just exited this cycle of power and control. And when you exit, the person who's causing harm has lost some control. And they often want to regain that control very quickly. And oftentimes the violence increases during that time. So it can be the most dangerous time. We see that a lot of homicides occur within 12 months of them leaving a relationship, a violent relationship. And so it's just really important to safety plan all throughout the time. So, if you're filing for a divorce, there's just things to think about as that occurs and as that divorce petition gets served. And when there's an award of custody, could be another dangerous time, particularly if the custody didn't go in the favor of the person who's caused harm, or division of assets, or all of those things. And it can be what we call flashpoints along the way that you really need to stop and think about how this might increase somebody's violence towards you when these decisions that are out of their control are happening and impacting them. And so it just can be a critical time once you've left to navigate those things and have someone else kind of dialogue with you about what to be thinking through.
I mean, not to mention if you have a kid involved, and if that abusive partner shares custody of that kid, I just safety planning itself seems like such a anxiety inducing experience on top of the abuse. And I guess I can just from a kind of outside perspective, I can kind of see why some people choose to just try and endure it. They may think that it's just easier or safer to just, well, I'm used to this. I can handle this, but I couldn't handle it something. How do you convince people that their 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 worth is not tied to that person?
Yeah, I think that's part of that has to happen over time. Um, one of the things is that I think people think of domestic violence as just physical abuse, and I think when we talk to survivors, they tell us it's the emotional and verbal abuse that's the hardest thing to overcome. It's the belittling and being told that they're worthless and that they're not a good wife, not a good mom. No one's ever going to want them again. And, just all the horrible things you can say to a person and how long it takes to sort of reprogram someone's thinking about themselves and to sort of dig down deep and notice their own value and worth apart from all of those words and hurt that have occurred. And so it's just a process. I mean, that's why the counseling piece is important. It's also why we have groups of survivors that can kind of share experiences and support one another. And that can be really life changing to realize you're not the only person that's experienced this kind of abuse, and listen to other people as they're overcoming what's been done to them. And so it's just an important piece. And I think survivors, it just takes time for survivors and child survivors, the children, to even sort of come to a new normal, right? And realize that the environment they were in wasn't normal, and that there can be safe, nurturing parenting and safe, nurturing relationships inside a family. And so it's just, rebuilding and creating that together with support, with outside support when you need it. So that's one of the things that I think is really important about DVIS, is that all of our services are free. And so, when you come, there's no charge, there's no money out of your pocket to receive services and talk to someone. Even if you're not like connected to counseling, you can walk in Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 5, and in a crisis, or if you're having some moments that you just need to talk to someone else about, you can walk in and speak with a crisis counselor. So you don't have to have an appointment on the books, but we'll get you on there. But you can also just walk in and see someone the same day.
Mhm. You know, so much of the emphasis and even, our conversation is focused on the survivor. Um, but I want to talk about the abuser for a minute. Because earlier you had mentioned how you have programs, counseling programs for survivors and for um, uh, people who've committed abuse. I don't know if you want to use the word abuser. I don't know how, because I can understand if someone sees themselves being classified that way, it makes it maybe that much more difficult for them to think they can change.
Yes, exactly. So we're kind of have changed our language over time around that. And when we talk about people who've caused harm,
Okay.
I think it also depends on what setting you're in. And with I think it's perfectly fine for someone who survived abuse to call that person abusive, because that's their lived experience with that person. But in the program where we serve people who caused harm, we talk about people who've used harm or caused harm with them. And many times the majority, and we have both male and females who come in who have caused harm. The majority of our groups are for men. I think we run about 16 groups. I want to say maybe 14 of those are male and 2 are female. It's sort of that sort of ratio in terms of our services for people who've caused harm. And so we know that people who cause harm often have been harmed. They've been abused as children. They've witnessed domestic violence as children in their own home. And this is something that was learned and that they're continuing to use. Of course, there's lots of influence around those things. There's mental health, and all the things that come with mental health treatment could be depression, anxiety, PTSD, other diagnosable disorders, but also substance abuse and use of substances. And all of those things are, again, factors that influence. They don't cause violence, but they certainly can exacerbate violence and just complicate it even more. So it's important to sort of start teasing those things out with people, so that you can get to the heart of the harm and why a person is causing harm. So yeah, I mean, we attempt to not remove someone's dignity when they're coming in, knowing that everybody has a story, has a lived experience, and our goal is to just help them recognize the harm that they've caused, um, and keep it from reoccurring. And so we would not be able to do that if we didn't build trust with people first and build some rapport and understanding about where they're coming from. Doesn't excuse violent behavior, doesn't make it okay, but it is important to work from from where the harm doer is when they walk in the door. And so that's what we strive to do when they come to see us.
This conversation reminds me of a movie. I don't know if you've seen Enough
Have it.
with Jennifer Lopez. It was like maybe early 2000s where basically she meets this guy and they have this loving relationship. It's like a montage of their dating, they get married, it's all a dream. And then like 6 years into the relationship, it fast forwards to they have a kid together, and you're starting to see some of these behaviors of control start to play out, to the point where she tries to, she does her safety plan, and he follows her around the country, and she ends up the solution that the movie gives, the solution that the movie tells society and women and girls is that she finds a fitness trainer, and she learns how to box, and she goes, you know, she basically, instead of waiting for him to come to her, she goes to him and, kills him in a fist fight. Um, what do you want society to tell men when it comes to our role in addressing domestic violence, considering that we hold the vast majority of people who've caused harm. We hold the majority of political power, right? In a patriarchal society. What should we be telling men in Oklahoma about their role in addressing this issue, whether they've caused harm or not?
I think it's really, really important that men get involved in the anti-violence movement. It's important for men to call out violence and abuse when they see it in their friends and other men, in anyone. Um, but until men start standing up to other men and saying, "Hey, that's not okay, dude. That's not good." Um, it's going to continue, and so that we have to set the bar higher for young boys and young men as they're growing up. That it's not okay to lay hands on anyone, especially women. And so, and it really does. It does take male mentors, role models out in the world, um, showing showing boys and young men how not to use violence and how to solve problems, how to deal with emotions without using violence. And so, there's some great sort of national movements. There's one called A Call to Men. Um, there's many out there that men can get involved in, and it's just really important. Men and boys are socialized to be strong and tough and to not cry, and I mean it really starts in some of those early years of like they don't throw like a sissy. I mean so we're already conditioning boys and men not to have feelings, right? Not to show weakness, all of those things, which is really just the platform, just the beginning of the platform that saying, your emotions are not okay, and you got to be tough, and you got to be in charge, and violence is okay. Eventually, it's going all the way to that extreme, and we just need to be there to interrupt that in that socialization process of our kids.
Right. Um, you know, I want to talk about some misconceptions, right? Clearly, this is the vast majority of cases involve men causing harm to women. But there are cases, of course, of domestic violence in LGBTQ plus relationships. And as you mentioned, there are some cases of women causing harm to men. Um, what are some misconceptions that you've seen or that you've heard a lot that you hope people can really get past to understand this issue?
Well, I think I want to speak to just kind of what you've mentioned is, there are um, sections of our population that are much, much higher risk for severe harm and violence. And those are traditionally LGBTQ plus, Native women, women of color, um, other, marginalized groups. And we see much higher rates of domestic violence and harm done in those groups than we do among, for instance, white women. And so I think that that's something we have to pay attention to, um, and and be ready to serve anyone who walks through our door, that's experienced that kind of harm. And so I think, um, the more we can produce advocates in the community that will be a safe person, be a safe place for someone to disclose what's happening to them, um, the safer we're going to have our community. I mean, if we can connect people to the services that they need, to the safety planning, to the, you know, to a welcoming, accepting environment that allows a woman, particularly, to make her decision to leave when she's ready to leave. And and then I think that flip side of just trying to think about how we're socializing kids as they're growing up. I think you have to have both of those things, and you have to have things like I mentioned the mayor's commission. You have to have all. I mean, we are where we are now, and so this is going to take multiple angles for us to address in Tulsa. And so, I believe that we're doing that. We can always do more, and we always need more people to join that effort. Well,
I have one last question for you. I want you to speak to the person who may be watching or listening, who may be going through domestic violence right now, and they've gotten the pamphlets, they know the websites, the numbers to call, but they haven't made that decision. What is your message to that person?
I think my biggest message to you is that we'll be here when you're ready, when you want the help and support. Uh, you deserve better. Your children deserve better. The violence will only get worse, and we'll be here when you need us. I think those are the main things I would want to know.
Tracey Lyall, CEO of Domestic Violence Intervention Services in Tulsa, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thank you for having me.